Stranded serendipity Naomi Campbell stuffed the last of her research notes into her waterproof bag, casting a nervous glance through the laboratory windows. The sky had transformed from Caribbean blue to an ominous charcoal in less than an hour. Hurricane warnings had been issued that morning, but the storm had accelerated with unexpected ferocity. "Dr. Campbell, I strongly suggest you evacuate immediately," came the crisp voice from the doorway. Naomi turned to face Jackson Reed, the founder of Oceanic Innovations and her employer for the past 8 months. His tall frame filled the doorway, expression as stormy as the gathering clouds outside. Despite funding the most advanced marine research facility in the Bahamas, Reed rarely visited, preferring to remain a distant figure who communicated through emails and video conferences. "Mr. Reed?" she acknowledged, surprised by his presence. "I'm just securing the specimens. The evacuation boat is waiting?" "Was waiting," he corrected, running a hand through his dark hair. "It departed 10 minutes ago. The captain couldn't delay any longer with the wind patterns shifting." Naomi's stomach dropped. "There must be another way off the island?" "My helicopter pilot advised against flying in these conditions." His jaw tightened. "It appears we're both stranded until the hurricane passes." The reality of being trapped on a remote island with Jackson Reed, billionaire tech genius and notoriously private individual, settled over Naomi like a heavy weight. She had only interacted with him a handful of times, each encounter leaving her with the impression of a brilliant but emotionally distant man. "The facility is hurricane-proof," he continued, checking his watch. "We have generators, supplies, and separate living quarters. We should prepare for at least 72 hours of isolation." A crash of thunder punctuated his words, making Naomi jump. The laboratory lights flickered ominously. "I need to check on my coral cultivation tanks," she said, regaining her composure. "If the power fluctuates, we could lose months of research." Jackson nodded. "I'll assist you. Then we should secure the rest of the building." For the next hour, they worked methodically through the laboratory, securing equipment and activating emergency protocols. Naomi was surprised by Reed's technical knowledge and hands-on approach, so different from his aloof CEO persona. "You understand the research systems," she observed as he expertly adjusted the backup power supply to her cultivation tanks. "I designed most of them," he replied without looking up. "Marine conservation was my first passion before technology became my business." This revelation caught Naomi off guard. In all the company materials, Jackson Reed was portrayed as a tech visionary who had diversified into environmental ventures, not someone with genuine scientific interest. As they finished securing the laboratory, the full force of the hurricane made landfall. The reinforced windows vibrated with each gust, and the sound of rain became a continuous roar. "We should move to the central living area," Jackson advised. "It's the most protected part of the facility." They relocated to a surprisingly comfortable common room with a kitchen, sofas, and a wall of books. Jackson activated the emergency lighting, casting the room in a soft amber glow. "There's food and water for 2 weeks," he explained, opening cabinet doors. "The generators should maintain essential systems, but we should conserve power where possible." Naomi nodded, suddenly aware of how small the space felt with just the two of them. Outside, the wind howled like a living creature, emphasizing their isolation. "I never expected to spend a hurricane with the boss," she said, attempting to lighten the mood. Jackson's expression remained serious. "I apologize for the circumstances, Dr. Campbell. I know this isn't ideal." "Naomi," she corrected. "If we're going to be stranded together through a hurricane, I think we can drop the formalities." Something shifted in his expression, a brief softening of the hard lines around his eyes. "Jackson, then," he conceded. A violent crack of thunder shook the building, and the main lights went out completely, leaving only the emergency lighting. In that moment, as the storm raged outside and uncertainty loomed ahead, Naomi realized that the next few days, trapped with the enigmatic Jackson, Reed would be unlike anything she had prepared for. Tidal confessions. The first night of the hurricane tested both their patience and adaptability. Jackson had transformed the common area into a functional command center, with weather monitors displaying the storm's trajectory and equipment status screens showing the facility's condition. Naomi watched him work with methodical precision, his fingers flying across keyboards as he rerouted power to critical systems. "The main generators are holding, but I've diverted power from non-essential areas," he explained, his face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens. "Your coral specimens should maintain optimal conditions." Naomi wrapped her hands around a mug of tea. "Thank you. Those specimens represent 2 years of research on coral resilience to climate change." "I know," Jackson replied, surprising her. "Your work on accelerated adaptive evolution in reef ecosystems is why I approved your grant proposal personally." A small smile formed on Naomi's lips. "And here I thought you were just another tech billionaire trying to greenwash his portfolio." The corner of Jackson's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "That's the public perception I've allowed to persist. It's easier to operate when people underestimate your genuine interests." The hurricane's wail intensified, and the building groaned under the assault. A particularly violent gust caused the lights to flicker again. Jackson immediately checked. "The system monitors. We should move to emergency protocols," he decided, standing abruptly. "We need to manually check the structural integrity of the East Wing." They made their way through dimly lit corridors, flashlights in hand. The storm's fury was more apparent in the outer sections of the facility, with the reinforced windows rattling against the wind's onslaught. "I designed this place to withstand Category 5 hurricanes," Jackson said as they inspected a section where rainwater had begun to seep under a door seal. "But this storm is pushing those limits." Working together, they secured the leak using emergency materials from a nearby supply cabinet. The physical task required coordination in the confined space, bringing them closer than their professional relationship had ever allowed. Naomi became acutely aware of Jackson's presence, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the smell of rain, the controlled strength in his movements, the intensity of his focus. "You're not what I expected," she admitted as they finished. "The repair." "How so?" He wiped his hands on a towel, his expression unreadable in the flashlight's beam. "You're hands-on, practical. The Jackson Reed I've heard about delegates everything and runs his empire from behind closed doors." He was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps both versions exist. The public figure serves a purpose. It keeps people at a distance." "And that's what you want? Distance?" A crash from somewhere in the facility interrupted their conversation. They rushed toward the sound, finding that part of the ceiling in one of the storage rooms had collapsed, rain pouring through the opening. "We need to evacuate this section," Jackson ordered, already moving equipment away from the growing puddle. "Help me save what we can." For the next hour, they worked frantically to relocate valuable research materials and equipment. The physical labor in the humid air left them, both drenched in sweat, their clothes clinging to their skin. When they finally secured the last of the important items in a dry location, exhaustion overcame them. They collapsed onto chairs in the common room, breathing heavily. Jackson's usually immaculate appearance had given way to disheveled hair and a soaked shirt with sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms covered in smudges of dirt. "When was the last time you did manual labor, Mr. CEO?" Naomi teased, trying to lighten the mood. To her surprise, Jackson laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. "I spend weekends rebuilding vintage motorcycles when I'm not being the untouchable Jackson Reed. Not that anyone would believe that." "I'm starting to," Naomi said softly. Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition that the storm had already begun to erode the carefully constructed walls between employer and employee, between the billionaire and the scientist. Jackson stood suddenly. We should eat something. Conservation of energy is critical in emergency situations. He moved to the kitchen area and began assembling ingredients with surprising competence. Naomi watched as he prepared a simple but hearty meal of pasta with canned vegetables and dried herbs. "Another hidden talent?" she asked, accepting the plate he offered. "Survival skill," he corrected. "I spent a year living on a research vessel. Before founding Oceanic Innovations, you learn to make do with limited supplies." As they ate by the light of emergency lamps, the howling wind a constant reminder of their isolation, Jackson's reserve began to crack further. "This facility," he said, gesturing to the walls around them, "was supposed to be my personal research base. Before the company grew, before the board of directors and shareholders and public scrutiny." Naomi listened, sensing he rarely shared these thoughts. "Success built a cage I never intended," he continued, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Every decision scrutinized, every relationship questioned for ulterior motives. Is that why you stay away? From your own research facility?" Jackson's eyes met hers, vulnerability visible for the first time. "It's easier to be the distant figure than to face what I've lost by becoming who everyone expects me to be." The confession hung in the air between them as the hurricane raged on, their unexpected connection deepening in the eye of the storm. Storm signals morning arrived without the usual indicators of dawn, just a slight lessening of the darkness as gray light filtered through the rain-lashed windows. Naomi woke on one of the common room couches, a blanket tucked carefully around her that she didn't remember having when exhaustion had finally claimed her. Jackson was already awake, his back to her as he studied the weather monitors. He had changed into fresh clothes, simple dark jeans and a gray t-shirt that looked startlingly casual compared to his usual tailored suits. "The hurricane has stalled over us," he announced without turning. "The eye won't reach us for at least another 12 hours, and then we'll face the second wall." Naomi sat up, running fingers through her tangled hair. "How did you know I was awake?" Your breathing pattern changed. He turned, offering a steaming mug. "I made coffee. The kitchen runs on a separate power system." She accepted the coffee gratefully, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The small contact sent an unexpected current through her, which she immediately attributed to the strange circumstances. "I need to check on my specimens," she said, trying to regain professional footing. Jackson nodded. "The lab systems are functioning on backup power. I've been monitoring them remotely." He gestured to a tablet showing live feeds of various facility sections. But a physical inspection would be prudent. They made their way to the laboratory wing, navigating around minor damage from the night before. The research lab was intact, though the usual sunlight that streamed through the large windows had been replaced by the storm's gloom, giving the space an otherworldly quality. Naomi checked her coral specimens, relief washing over her when she confirmed they were thriving despite the chaos outside. Jackson watched her work, his eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her increasingly self-conscious. "These polyps are remarkable," she explained, filling the silence. "They've adapted to temperature fluctuations that would bleach normal coral. If we can understand their adaptive mechanisms, we might have a blueprint for helping coral reefs survive climate change," Jackson finished. "That's why I funded this research line over objections from my board. They wanted more immediately, profitable ventures." Naomi looked up, surprised. "I didn't know there were objections. They called it a passion project without ROI potential." His expression darkened. "As if everything must be measured in quarterly earnings. Yet you persisted. Some things matter more than money." He stepped closer, examining the coral. "My parents were marine biologists. They died researching coral bleaching in Australia when I was in college. I promised myself their work wouldn't be forgotten." The personal revelation hung in the air between them. Naomi realized how little anyone knew about Jackson's motivations, how carefully he guarded his personal history. "I had no idea," she said, softly. There's nothing about that in your company biography, because it's not relevant to stock prices. Bitterness edged his voice. The public doesn't want the real story. They want the myth of the tech genius who built an empire through cold calculation. Naomi studied his face, the tension around his eyes, the carefully controlled expression that occasionally slipped, to reveal genuine passion. "I'd like to hear the real story," she said, "if you want to tell it." Jackson looked momentarily startled by her interest. Before he could respond, a deafening crack of thunder shook the building, and the lights went out completely. In the sudden darkness, Naomi felt Jackson's hand find hers, steady and warm. "Don't move," he said, his voice close to her ear. "The emergency system should activate in 3 seconds." True to his prediction, backup lighting flickered on, bathing the lab in a soft amber glow. His hand remained around hers longer than necessary, and when he finally released it, Naomi felt the absence acutely. "We should return to the common area," he suggested. "The main generators must have failed. We need to assess our situation." Back in their makeshift command center, Jackson worked to reroute the remaining power to critical systems, while Naomi prepared a simple lunch from their emergency supplies. They ate together as the storm intensified, the sound of wind and rain creating a strangely intimate cocoon around them. "Tell me about your parents," Naomi said as they finished eating. "What were they like?" The question seemed to catch Jackson off guard. He was silent for so long that Naomi thought he might not answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak, about his mother's passion for marine ecosystems, his father's methodical research approach, their shared dedication to preserving ocean life. As he talked, his usual reserve melted away, replaced by animated gestures and genuine emotion. They believed science should serve a greater purpose than profit or academic recognition, he concluded. "That's the principle I built Oceanic Innovations on, before shareholders and market expectations complicated everything. Is that why you stay away from your own facilities? Because they've become something different than what you intended?" Jackson considered her question carefully. "Partly. But it's also easier to maintain distance. People expect certain behaviors. From a billionaire CEO, getting personally involved creates complications." "Like actually caring about the research?" Naomi challenged. "Like caring about the people doing the research," he corrected, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. The admission hung between them as another violent gust rocked the building. The storm outside matched the growing turbulence within. Naomi's thoughts, professional boundaries blurring, unexpected connection forming in the crucible of their isolation. "The hurricane center is approaching," Jackson said, breaking the moment as he checked the weather monitors. "We should prepare for the worst of it." Yet as they moved through the facility, securing loose items and checking structural integrity, Naomi sensed that something fundamental had shifted between them, a connection forming that might prove more powerful than the hurricane that had brought them together. Weathering heights. By evening, the hurricane had reached its full, terrifying power. The facility groaned under the assault of wind and rain, the reinforced windows vibrating with each gust. Jackson and Naomi had retreated to the innermost section of the building, a small room originally designed as a secure data center but now serving as their shelter within a shelter. "The structural integrity of the East Wing is compromised," Jackson said, studying the facility schematics on his tablet. "If the hurricane maintains this intensity for another 6 hours, we could see catastrophic failure in sections C through F." Naomi felt a chill run through her. "My specimens are in section D." Jackson looked up, understanding immediately. "We can relocate the critical ones to the secure lab adjacent to this room. It has independent power and environmental controls." "It's too dangerous," she protested. "The corridors between here and there could be compromised." 2 years of research, Naomi. He met her eyes steadily. You said yourself these specimens could be key to saving coral reefs globally. That's worth the risk. Before she could argue further, he was gathering emergency equipment, flashlights, communication devices, tools for clearing debris. His decisiveness reminded her that beneath the reserved exterior was a man accustomed to calculated risks. If we're doing this, we go together, she insisted, gathering her own equipment. I know which specimens are most valuable, and you know the building systems. They secured communication headsets and prepared to venture into the storm-ravaged facility. Before they left the safety of their shelter, Jackson paused, his hand on the door. If anything happens, he said, his voice unnaturally serious, get yourself to safety. The specimens are important, but they're not worth your life. Same goes for you, Naomi replied. No heroics, Mr. Billionaire. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Ready? The journey through the facility was harrowing. Sections of ceiling had collapsed, water pooled in corridors, and the wind shrieked through gaps in the building's exterior. They navigated carefully, communicating through their headsets when the noise became too overwhelming for normal conversation. They had almost reached the laboratory when a violent gust tore through the building, bringing down a section of wall ahead of them. Jackson pulled Naomi back just as debris crashed where she had been standing. Are you all right? He shouted over the storm's roar, his hands gripping her shoulders, eyes scanning for injuries. I'm fine, she assured him. But her racing heart had little to do with the near miss, and everything to do with his proximity, his evident concern. They found an alternate route to the laboratory, where Naomi quickly identified the most valuable specimens. Together, they carefully packed the delicate coral samples into portable containers with battery-powered environmental controls. That's the last one, Naomi announced, securing the final container. Now we just need to... Her words were cut short by an ominous creaking sound overhead. Jackson looked up, his expression changing to alarm. Move! He shouted, lunging toward her as the ceiling began to give way. In the chaos that followed, Naomi was aware only of Jackson's body covering hers, shielding her as debris rained down around them. When the dust settled, they were trapped in a small pocket of space, a fallen beam blocking their exit path. Jackson? Fear clutched at Naomi's throat when he didn't immediately respond. I'm here, he finally answered, his voice strained. Are you hurt? No, I'm okay. You? He shifted, wincing visibly. Something hit my leg. Nothing serious, but we need to find another way out. Despite his assurances, Naomi could see blood seeping through his jeans. You're injured. A cut. Focus on the specimens. Are they intact? Incredibly, the containers had survived the collapse, protected by the same workbench that had created their safe pocket. Naomi checked each one, confirming they were functioning properly. They're all operational, she reported, then turned her attention back to Jackson. Let me see your leg. Reluctantly, he allowed her to examine the injury, a deep gash along his calf where a piece of metal had sliced through the denim. Using the first aid kit from her emergency pack, Naomi cleaned and bandaged the wound as best she could in the confined space. Thank you, he said quietly as she worked. Not just for this, but for coming back to save the research. Most people wouldn't have risked it. Says the man who just used his body as a human shield, she countered, securing the bandage. Their eyes met in the dim emergency lighting, and something unspoken passed between them. We need to find a way out, Jackson said, breaking the moment. He activated his communication device. The main exit is blocked. We'll need to use the maintenance tunnels beneath the lab floor. With his guidance and her support for his injured leg, they managed to access the tunnel system. The narrow passages forced them to move close together, Jackson's arm around Naomi's, shoulders for balance. Each step brought them into greater physical awareness of each other, his breath against her hair, her hand steady at his waist. When they finally emerged in the secure laboratory adjacent to their shelter, exhaustion overcame them both. They carefully placed the specimen containers in the environmental units, ensuring each was properly connected to power and monitoring systems. Only then did the adrenaline fade, leaving them suddenly aware of what they had risked and why. Naomi turned to find Jackson watching her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Open, unguarded, filled with something that made her breath catch. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm still raging outside. "Why risk yourself like that?" "Because some things are worth protecting at any cost," he answered, his gaze never leaving hers. "The research and the researcher." The last words hung in the air between them, a confession neither had expected. In the artificial twilight of the emergency lighting, with the hurricane howling beyond the walls, Naomi crossed the distance between them. Her hand rose to his face, touching his cheek with gentle wonder. "I thought I knew who Jackson Reed was," she whispered. "I was wrong." "We're both more than our professional identities," he replied, his hand covering hers. "It took a hurricane to make me remember that." The kiss that followed was inevitable, as natural and powerful as the storm itself. In that moment, all boundaries dissolved. Employer and employee, billionaire and scientist, public persona and private truth. They were simply two people finding connection in the eye of the storm, discovering that sometimes the greatest discoveries happen when we least expect them. Clear horizons. The morning after the hurricane brought an almost startling silence. Naomi woke to sunlight streaming through the small reinforced window of their shelter, the absence of wind and rain creating an unfamiliar quiet. Jackson was already awake, speaking quietly into a satellite phone, his back to her. "Yes, full evacuation protocol. Priority on medical personnel and structural engineers. And I need the research transport team with specialized equipment." He paused, listening. 3 hours is acceptable. We'll be ready." He ended the call and turned, finding Naomi watching him. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face, a vulnerability she'd never have believed possible in the Jackson Reed she'd known before the storm. "Good morning," he said, his voice softer than his usual businesslike tone. "The worst is over. Rescue teams will arrive within 3 hours." Naomi sat up, suddenly aware of the intimacy they had shared in the darkness of the storm and the reality that now faced them in the clear light of day. "How's your leg?" she asked, defaulting to practical concerns. "Better," he demonstrated by walking toward her with only a slight limp. "Your field medicine skills are impressive." An awkward silence fell between them. The intensity of their connection during the crisis seemed simultaneously fragile and overwhelming in the aftermath. "We should assess the damage," Naomi suggested, standing and gathering her hair into a ponytail. "See what's salvageable." Jackson nodded, and they made their way through the facility. The destruction was substantial. Collapsed ceilings, flooded laboratories, equipment strewn about like toys. Yet remarkably, the core research areas had survived, including the secure lab where they had relocated the coral specimens. "The specimens made it," Naomi confirmed, checking each container. "They're all viable." "Good." Jackson stood in the doorway, watching her work. "Your research will continue without interruption. I'll have a new facility prepared within a month." The businesslike statement hung between them, highlighting the return to their professional relationship. Naomi felt a pang of disappointment as she realized how easily he was slipping back into his CEO persona. "Just like that? We go back to Dr. Campbell and Mr. Reed pretending the last 48 hours never happened?" She hadn't meant to sound so challenging, but the words escaped before she could stop them. Jackson's expression tightened. "What happened during the storm was real," she interrupted. "At least it was for me." He looked away, his jaw working, as if struggling with some internal conflict. "My life is complicated, Naomi. The board, the shareholders, the public scrutiny. Any personal relationship would be immediately dissected, analyzed for ulterior motives, used against both of us. So you hide instead? Stay behind your walls because it's safer? It's not that simple. It never is, she acknowledged, softening her tone. But sometimes the things worth having require risk. Before he could respond, his satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message. The first helicopter is 10 minutes out, he reported after checking it. We should gather our essential belongings. They worked in silence, collecting research data, personal items, and the surviving specimens. As they packed, Naomi noticed Jackson repeatedly glancing at her, as if wanting to say something but holding back. When the distant sound of helicopter rotors finally broke the silence, they stood facing each other in the common room where their unexpected journey had begun. Naomi, Jackson started, then stopped, uncharacteristically hesitant. It's okay, she said, though it wasn't. We can go back to our professional relationship. I understand the complications. No, he said firmly. You don't understand what I'm trying to say. The helicopter sounds grew louder, signaling the imminent end of their isolation. For years, I've built walls to protect myself from genuine connection, Jackson continued, his words coming faster now. It seemed safer, cleaner, but these past 2 days trapped in a hurricane with you have been more real than the last 5 years of board meetings and media appearances. Hope flared in Naomi's chest, but she remained cautious. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying I don't want to go back. He stepped closer. Not to who I was before the storm, not to the distance I've maintained from everything that matters. The helicopter landed on the facility's roof, the thrum of its engines vibrating through the building. My life will still be complicated, he warned. The scrutiny, the demands on my time, the public persona I have to maintain in certain contexts. I'm not asking for simple, Naomi replied. I'm asking for genuine. Jackson reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. Then let's figure it out together. Not as CEO and researcher, but as Jackson and Naomi. The door to the roof access opened, and rescue personnel entered the common room. Jackson didn't release her hand as they approached, a small but significant declaration. Mr. Reed, the team leader greeted him. We're here to evacuate you and... Dr. Campbell, are you both all right? We're fine, Jackson answered, his eyes still on Naomi. Better than fine, actually. As they boarded the helicopter, the devastation of the hurricane was visible across the island. Trees flattened, structures damaged, the landscape altered. Yet amid the destruction, new patterns had formed, new pathways created by the force of the storm. Looking out at the transformed landscape, Naomi felt Jackson's hand close around hers again. Like the island below them, they too had been reshaped by forces beyond their control, barriers broken down to reveal something unexpected and precious. The helicopter lifted higher, carrying them away from the island, but not from what they had discovered there. Below them, the ocean stretched out in all directions, vast and full of possibilities, much like the future that now lay before them, uncertain but promising, complex but real. As they flew toward the mainland, the rising sun broke fully through, the dissipating clouds illuminating their path forward with brilliant clarity. Whatever challenges awaited them in the world they were returning to, they would face them together. Two people forever changed by a storm that had done more than destroy. It had, in its wild and unpredictable way, also created something new.